Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kentucky Small Business Development Center's weekly webinar. We're glad you're here. So as we allow attendees a few moments to join our event, I'd like to share a little info about the Kentucky Small Business Development Center. We are the only statewide nationally accredited program that provides entrepreneurial and business development services. And the Kentucky SBDC plays a vital role in the Commonwealth's economic development by assisting entrepreneurs at every stage of their business life cycle. For almost 40 years, the Kentucky Small Business Development Center has assisted emerging and growing businesses by providing professional expertise, tools, and information necessary to make sound business decisions in a complex and ever-changing marketplace. We do this at no cost to our clients, thanks to the U.S. Small Business Administration, who co-sponsors our program, which is then administered by the University of Kentucky, who partners with regional universities, colleges, and local economic development agencies. We're also part of a national network, America's SBDC, with over 1,000 centers across the nation. To learn more, visit kybizhelp.com, and there you'll find additional resources to help start, fund, and grow your business. Also, to request personal assistance, email us at info@kybizhelp.com or call 1-888-475-7232. Just a little reminder, a recording of today's webinar will be emailed to you this afternoon. And if you look to the right of your screen, you'll find the chat feature. If you have any questions for our presenter, you can post them here, and then we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. So let's go ahead and give the chat feature a try by saying hello and telling us where you're from. We always like to hear and see where everybody kind of pops in at. I'm Dave Etkin. I am the director of the Louisville Small Business Development Center, and we are one of 13 centers that make up the Kentucky Small Business Development Center network throughout the Commonwealth. Today, I'd like to welcome my good friend and a great resource in business as far as marketing and market development and just general change agent, Lyle Hawkins. He is, I've known Lyle for many years and actually have used his services on several occasions, and he is quite a resource. So Lyle, I'm gonna just let you tell everybody, or let you explain your background, because you have such a diverse background. It's quite impressive, and your knowledge is, especially on product development and launching new products in the marketplace, is pretty cool. So, but today we're going to talk about basically some ways to reboot and get through 21 in a better shape than we made it through 2020, right, Lyle?
Absolutely. You want me to go ahead?
So yeah. So go ahead, Lyle.
All right. Well, thanks, Dave, for this opportunity. Can everybody hear me okay? Dave, can you hear me all right? Everything good?
Yep, you're doing great.
All right. So let me kind of start with this first slide, and there's I'm kind of getting an echo why I'm pausing here for a second, but so 2020 has no doubt been, one of those very bizarre years, right, where companies have really had a tough time. I guess that's probably an oversimplification, but I was talking with a friend of mine recently who has two successful restaurants here in Louisville. They've been in business for over 20 years, and we were chatting actually over lunch one day, and I talked to him about, his business, and he was telling me, the changes they had to undergo, and all the issues and barriers that he's run up against, and the changes he's had to implement. And we started to talk about it, and I said, you know what, it really sounds like, you've done a good job at adapting. And he looked at me and he said, you know what, that's it. It's adaptation. We've had to continuously adapt. And so I thought about his comment there, and I said, you know what, to myself, that's really what this is about moving forward, because there is no normal anymore. Even when, year to year things would change, the change has been so dramatic this past year, it looks like there'll be numerous forthcoming dramatic changes again, that companies really have to learn to adapt and continuously adapt. And so I started thinking about that and laying that against, the things that I've encountered over my 20 something years of developing products for companies like Robert Bosch, Charbroil Camping, um, Coleman Camping, Charbroil Gas Grills, Coates and Clark Textiles, and so forth. And then for 10 years, my partner and I worked with the state of Kentucky, helping entrepreneurs, inventors, conduct market audits, write business plans. So nearly 100 audits and business plans. As you can see, the list there ranging from medical devices to pet products to power tools to over-the-counter medical products. And it really kind of resonated with me after all these years that what he was talking about, this adaptation, it could be the silver lining into 2021, is these kind of identified, if you'll allow me, to suggest for you today, for your consideration, 7 layers of the silver lining of adaptation. So that's really what this is about. That was the catalyst for this presentation. So again, if you allow me, I'll take you through what I believe could be 7 layers of adaptation to help you succeed in 2021. So first of all, start at the end, if you will. Start at the end with your end consumer. And because at the end of the day, whether you have a product or a service, it's matching that product or service, right? The benefits thereof, and aligning those with the consumer segments, right? Their needs, wants, and desires. But I found over the years 3 simple questions to ask and understanding your end user, your consumer, is what do they want, why do they want it, and how they know they got it, right? And I think in answering those questions and starting with the end consumer, because at the end of the day, you got to satisfy them to stay in business, right? Like my friend in the restaurant business, he segmented and targeted audiences, and that allowed him to keep his business moving. He adapted to his audiences and how they were adapting. So let me give you a couple of examples. And here's one I'll use from days gone by, although I think it's relevant today as well. And I know it's kind of a bizarre little graphic down there with that roach, but let me tell you a quick little story. I was going through a Emerson Electronics. They were actually giving a management seminar, and I was part of that management group at the time. And they gave a story about S.C. Johnson. S.C. Johnson had developed a very potent, if you will, pesticide for in-home use that would eliminate roaches in this case. So they did, extensive studies, laboratory testing, etc. And they said this stuff's phenomenal. Basically kill any kind of critter in North America. So they packaged it. They sold it under the brand, and this is a true story, by the way. They sold it under the brand S.C. Johnson. It went into Home Depot, Lowe's, Walmart, etc., and it was selling well. In grocery chains as well. It was selling well, but about 3 to 6 months later, they started getting a lot of the product back. And the reps obviously were not happy with this, right? Because that's their sales commissions, and there's penalties and clauses, right, for buybacks, etc. So they weren't happy. So products coming back, they go back to the lab in essence and said, "What's going on? You said this product worked." And they said, "Well, it does work." So they sent a team out into the field, and they watched people using the product. And what was happening was that people were taking the product and they were spraying this pest, if you will, and the pest would continue to run off and hide. And what was happening is they'd spray the pest, it would run and hide behind, let's say, a refrigerator or a cabinet, and there it would die. But as far as the end users were concerned, the last thing they saw was this pest running between cracks in a wall or running behind a refrigerator. So as far as they're concerned, it was still alive. So what they did was they went back and they put a paralyzing agent into this product. So what happened is when they spray this pest, the pest would fall over right then because it was paralyzed, and it wasn't dying at that juncture. It wasn't dead, but it was paralyzed. But as far as the end consumer was concerned, that pest was dead. So that was the signaling cue. Once they saw it die in their sight, the product worked. It worked to begin with, but the signaling cue wasn't there. So my point goes back to, what do they want? Why do they want it? And how they know they got it? In this case, how they knew they got it was they saw the pest die in their sight. So therein lies the point I'm trying to make. Go back to start with your end user, know what they want, why they want it, and how they know they got it. Ever so important. The other thing then is think of these groups and try to segment these groups to make it more manageable into distinct segments. And so identifying consumer segments, right, and search for these groups that have adequate size, right? You're not looking for one or two people. You're looking for hundreds or thousands of people. And you're looking for members of a group that have a high degree of similarity and that they're relevant to the purchasing behavior. For in case of the on-site food truck, right, their behavior is such that they're amenable to a food truck, be it taking that food truck to an event, a concert event, or taking that food truck to a neighborhood event, right? Those groups become segments. And so you look for defined and sizable groups that are distinctive and are reachable. If you can't reach them, then they're not relevant, right? They can be large, but if you have no mechanism to reach them, then there'll be no revenue for you. So it's looking for groups, understanding your end user, what they want, why they want it, how they know they got it, and looking for segments. And then it's also at that juncture is you need to keep in mind the entire consumption chain. Now, let me give you an example. This was a real life example several years ago. We helped a company, we conducted a market audit, business plan, helped them get funded. They launched a child entertainment center here in Kentucky. Won't really go into where, the name, but they launched it and it was successful, very successful, by the way. And as you can see in the picture in the bottom right, the promotion was so successful with their launch, the fire marshal had to only allow so many people in at a time because it was that crowded, right? But its consumption chain, as you'll see at the top graphic there, and we'll just call it, Tiki Island for lack of another name. But his audiences, as you can see, to get to the end consumer, that child on the far right, he had to reach the parents, right? And the grandparents. And he had to reach a single adult, be it a man or a woman that was raising that child. Those were his different intermediary audiences that he had to reach to get to that child, right? Now, the signaling cue for that child is once they got the child there, the child was happy. The child ran around and got their yayas out, if you will. Well, that was a signaling cue to the parents that this worked. But in this scenario, that all went well until they had a competitive response from, in this case, it was a Chuck E. Cheese, where they reduced their fee for parents and grandparents. And we went to this client and we said, look, you need to adjust your fees, you need to adapt. And he didn't adapt. He kept the fees because he didn't understand that to get to that child, he had to get through the grandparents and the parents. And so his business stalled, it went down until he ultimately reluctantly adjusted. So you've got to understand not only your competition, but your full consumption chain of how you go from your product to your ultimate consumer and who's in the middle, who else do you have to deal with, and watch those as well. So once you've identified your audience, so the first layer is the end user, right? Know your audience, know your end user, segment them as much as possible, look for segments that are reachable, that are sizable, attainable, and then take those segments and align them with your finances. At the end of the day, right, the lifeblood of business is your finance, food, beverage, and labor. But that's fine. Look at it that way. Continue to monitor it that way. But what I'm recommending here as a second layer is to consider taking those financial information, those data, and aligning that with your segments. So in this case, indoor dining, outdoor dining, food truck, and then look at what's changed, right? Compare prior year against current year, and you could even project forward, obviously. But for this simple discussion, we'll just say, look, compare it to prior year, current year, and where is it? Is it up or down? And then you can start to make more informative decisions about these various segments, right? Which segment's growing, which segment's declining. And then once you start to get a handle on that, then frame it up in, if you will, kind of a very simple decision tree evaluation. It gives you a simpler, visual, if you will. Decision trees can be very complex, but you get too complex, you won't use it, right? So keep it simple. So in this case, you have pre-COVID. Here's the indoor dining, $25K a month, 50% of the revenue. Then COVID happened. There were increased restrictions. There was a 60% reduction, right? It went to 10K. And then there was issues with outdoor dining. They could only open until 10 p.m., 20% reduction. There was only in delivery where there was a greater demand. They had 100%. They went from 5K a month to 10K a month. So what you want to do is you start to break these segments out, right? You've identified the segments. You're looking for their needs, wants, and desires, right? Their signaling cues, what do they want, how they know they got it, why they want it, and how they know they got it. And then you're looking at what's happening in these groups. Is the revenue increasing or decreasing? And then what I suggest is the next layer is you want to involve your people, right? Don't try to do this alone. Don't try to think you have all the answers. Tap into your key employees. I like to use the old adage here from Woodrow Wilson. Don't only use all the brains you have, but all you can borrow too, right? Because collectively, you're stronger as a team. And so your objective, right, as you're going through ups and downs in your business and dealing with changes in the economic arena, if you will, then you're going to inform your team that, look, we're going to adapt together, we're going to adjust, and we're going to thrive. And we're going to do that because we're going to pull together. And you want to pull in, like 7 or fewer employees. Don't pull in 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 employees. That's too many input points, right? Going through a GE management seminar one time, they went real in depth about the dynamics and input points and discussion groups. And they found that anything really over 7 became too complex. So try to keep it, 5, 6, 7 employees, pull those together, and then frame it up. Frame up your question, your brainstorming in terms of the framing question, how can we, right? It's an excellent tool to focus what you're after. So in this case, how can we increase outdoor dining revenue, right? And you're going to brainstorm. And by the way, I can send you a couple slides on brainstorming. GE, for example, had a great program for this, where they had checks of things to do and not do and so forth. So if you're interested in doing something like this, I can send you those couple of slides. But what you want to do is you want to tie this back, right, to the segments that you've identified. So in this particular scenario, you're asking your team, how can we increase outdoor dining revenue, right? And you want to capture those ideas. Now, the important point here is you want to capture and prioritize those. You want to focus on what's important. You don't want to take the puppy dog approach. And what I mean by this is chasing every little colorful ball, right? You say, oh, blue one. Oh, that's really cool. That's pretty. And you go chase it. And then you go, oh, a red one. You want to focus, right? And one way to do that, and it's a fairly simple tool, is you can build an added factor index. So let me kind of take you through this. For example, in this particular scenario, the framing question, you can see there it's red, and then underneath that's the framing question, how can we increase outdoor dining revenue? And they brainstormed, and there may have been 10, 15 different things, but I'll cap it here for our discussion at 4 items. And they said, look, we'll expand outdoor dining footprint. We'll add more tables, right? Add higher revenue items, etc. So what you want to do then is ask yourself as a company, what are the 4 or 5 critical factors in looking at these particular options, right? So for this particular company, they said, look, what's important to us is strength. In other words, how well we do this today. Is it something that we're known for and that we do well? Well, that's important to us. And then how much money, what's the capital it's going to take, right? And then training, how much training, particularly if it's a restaurant, how much training is going to be involved? Is it something that the existing employees can easily, convert to, or does it require a host of training exercises? Timing, how quickly, right? Time's money. Impact, what's the monthly gross revenue in this case? And then you want to set up a scoring system for that. And I've found that it's usually best to keep the scoring system simple, like 1 to 5. You can do 1 to 10, that's fine. But then keep these, keep the scoring simple. So for example, capital. How much money will it take? Well, I'm going to score it a 1 to 5, if it's less than $5,000. I'll score it a 3 if it's 5 to 7.5K. And I'm going to score it lower if it's more than $7,500 to implement this, right? Because the more money, I'm going to give it a lower score. So you would set this up with your team and identify this and score these things. But these factors, you also want to weight these factors, for example. Weighting should come out to 100. So in this case, this company said, what's most important to us is something that can be done very quickly, timing. So in that case, how quickly can we train the staff? Is it 4 to 5 weeks, less than that? Or is it more? Or is it a month, etc.? Well, we're going to score that. We're going to give that, though, that weighting is going to be 30% out of 100 for us. The next important factor in this particular case, the company said the impact, right? What's the impact going to be? What's the revenue? Can we do it quickly? And will it generate revenue quickly for us? And how much revenue? We want that to be number 2. We're going to give that a score of 25. And then you can see capital. How much money is it going to take to implement it? And once you do that, right, then these just simply multiply against the 2 multiplies against the 10%, which gives you 0.2. And those are calculated for each factor that's been identified. And then you end up with a score. So in this particular case, you can see the 4.15 is expand outdoor dining footprint, right? That becomes your most important item that you've identified as a team that you want to implement. So let me kind of recap this a little bit. You've identified your team. You've identified the framing question, right? How can we? And you've solicited your ideas. You brainstormed, you solicited the ideas, and you've ranked and prioritized those ideas. Now, before we move into assigning and tracking, right? Because if you don't hold yourself accountable and make sure these get done, then this will all be kind of wasted effort. But let's say, well, look, Lyle, that's pretty complex. We don't know if we can go to that level. I'm not comfortable. Well, there's different ways you can do that. Here's if you will, a simpler way of looking at the same type of information, right? It's a visual matrix, a quadrant map, if you will, where it's looking at it in terms of demand and impact and time and resources, and using a very similar, scale from, in this case, 1 to 10, and they score it, a 7 and a 5, or let's say, for example, add the wedding planner, a 9 and a 9, and then the impact. Well, you can see a 9 and a 9 places the adding a wedding planner in the upper right quadrant, indicating, boy, this is really something we need to take a look at doing. Now, what's interesting is you could also look at, see, for example, expand outdoor dining. And you say, look, the market demand is relatively high for that. It's kind of mid-range in terms of us. What can we do to drive that up to the upper right? And you can brainstorm about that. maybe there's something simple that can be done to drive that little blue bubble, if you will, to the upper right. So it's not only a static of where you think it is now, but where you think you can take something. And it becomes a very effective exercise with you and your team, right? So now we've looked at our end users, we've segmented our end users, we've brainstormed ideas, we've framed up the question so that we've prioritized what we want to do. Now the next layer becomes accountability. Hold yourself and your others accountable. This is kind of, it looks simple, but it's kind of like the old adage Abraham Lincoln said, right? I would have written you a shorter letter if I had more time. Well, this shorter letter took a lot of time to get to this. I've tried other things with companies over the years, engagements, models, but they were so complex. After the initial launch of it, they just never got used. So this is very simple, little Excel spreadsheet. Again, I can send this to you if you like. There's a template available. But you see, how can we increase outdoor dining revenue? Well, there's been a champion assigned to it. In this case, John. So John's been assigned to leading this, and John has prepared a team, 3, 4 people, whatever is appropriate. And he's brainstormed the steps needed to get that done. And you don't want to have more than 10 steps because it gets too complex, right? So 10 or fewer steps to accomplish this. And in this case, we then assigned responsibility. And John took on the first step, and he's already accomplished that during week 1. And the green is indicating here what they anticipate or when they anticipate completing those particular action steps. So you can see this second one is also in week 1, the third one, etc. And define cost is going to be during week 2. And you can see notations on the right. Now, I saw something similar to this done. It was Bosch Automotive in the Carolinas. They were very effective at this. They used something very simple like this. And as they tracked it, they kept it in not only in the stations that were impacted by the particular, category, or in this case, outdoor dining, but they would have kept it, let's say it's over where they're developing spark plugs. They would keep this tracking over there so everybody could walk by it and see it. In the case of a restaurant, it may be in the break room, where this is there in the break room. Everybody can see what's being accomplished and timing. And that builds morale. I can tell you firsthand, having worked with companies on a global scale and on a single location scale, entrepreneurial scale, that once you implement something like this, a brainstorming with your team, you can see morale goes way up because they value what I have to say. And so morale goes way up. And if you implement this tool, the morale stays up. I will forewarn you, though, if you do the brainstorming and you get people involved and you listen to their feedback and input and you don't implement something and then they go, well, then what was the point? And you get the reverse effect. People get discouraged. So if you're going to do the brainstorming and go through the framing question and prioritize the projects, then by all means, please implement this kind of very simple tool or something else that you feel is useful for you. But track it and let people see that there's progress being done. And I think you'll be very surprised at the impact you'll have. It's extremely positive. So hold people accountable. And then ultimately, don't lose what you have. I often refer back to the Ansoff matrix, right? Where it's the easiest thing to do is to maintain what you have, right? So don't lose the groups that you have. Define your segments, reach out to your segments, prioritize those segments, and then focus on your current customers. Penetrate your customer base. Use whatever vehicles you can use to maximize your contact point. If you're a restaurant, right, let them leave with a coupon. Make sure you get their information. Interact on Facebook. I mean, there's so many tools out there today where you can keep contact points with your customers. It's just, you know, important to simply state it. So be deliberate, right? So don't lose what you have, will be layer number 5. And then once you've accomplished that, you feel comfortable that you're implementing programs to attract and maintain the segments that you have, then and only then do you reach out to new customers. You know, look for untapped, sizable, reachable consumer group segments. Again, if they're not sizable, it doesn't matter, right? You spend $1,000 to generate $100 worth of business, just doesn't make sense, right? So reach out to groups that are sizable, and they got to be reachable. In other words, how are we going to tap into the group? How are we going to make them aware of what we're offering? So, you know, understand those groups. You know, if it's a restaurant, how far will people travel for pickup? How far is too far for Uber Eats, Grubhub, etc.? So, you know, that's the layer number 6. And the 7th and final layer, quite honestly, is just to learn to adapt and keep adapting. Don't get stuck. I mean, start with your customer groups, focus on those groups, continuously do a financial review against those segment groups, continuously involve your team. Again, you know, bring in all the brain power you can. It builds morale as well. So, and that's very important during turbulent times, right? To keep morale high. And then accountability, right? Track it. Hold people accountable. And conversely, not only hold people accountable, but reward your people. And there's a whole series of things we could talk about, perhaps in another presentation, about how to reward people, how to keep people, you know, in tune and motivated. And then customer retention, new customers, and then again, evaluate your adaptation effects, your models, your techniques, and do it again. Just keep going around the circle. And I think in doing so, you'll not only adapt, but you'll thrive. So that's the presentation. I hope you found it informative. I hope there was something there that you can glean out and put to use. So thank you for your time.
That was great, Lyle. Thank you so much for that. Do you think that we have a couple minutes that you can maybe speak a little bit about the GE brainstorming method? I've had a couple questions about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a kind of a list they use of do's and don'ts in brainstorming. That's probably the most simple or the most effective tool. It's 15 or 20. You know, they say do this, make sure you don't do this. Simple things like, you know, assigning a scribe. I don't know if you ever heard of a parking lot, but have a parking lot so that when ideas come up that may not be relevant to the topic at hand, but yet it's something that's worthy of a discussion later, then you create a parking lot and you set that idea over there, right? So simple things like that they've identified. You know, I'd be happy to you know, put together a couple slides and send that to you, Dave, so you can send that out.
Okay. Early on, you were talking about segmenting, you know, market opportunities more or less. I mean, where would someone go to find information and resources to, I mean, even start to do that?
Well, I mean, look, the first place you go to segment your audience is your audience, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, that's
you know, go to the people you have already, right? and talk to them. If it's a restaurant, talk to them. It's, you know, it could be that simple. It could be a little exit cards, right? They fill out and bring back. It could be Facebook queries, but it goes back to the Ansoff matrix again, right? The first thing you want to do is solidify your customer base, and so the customers you have coming in, you know, how can you segment them? What are their interests? What are their needs, wants, and desires, right? You know, I'll give you an example. One segment, and sometimes segments will just bubble up, right? It's kind of like a bubble theory. When the pandemic hit, my friend who has these I'll just speak to him because it's the most current conversation. He has a food truck, right? Well, that food truck he used really on targeted events, right? Events downtown, concerts and things. Well, when COVID and this pandemic hit, neighborhoods started calling and saying, "Hey, do you have a food truck or a way to deliver food here? We're bringing people together in a neighborhood," and so he started seeing that and that bubble raise, right? So that became a segment for him, and it became now as the bubble's kind of diminishing a little bit. But how can he learn from that and find other bubbles, similar bubbles, right? Was his case, and then that food truck uh, was sitting there. So he steps back and says, "Look, I'm now going to look at that food truck as not as a little business unit that's going to target different consumer segments." Now he's starting to look at that food truck differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so my point being, it's look at the audiences you have and what they're doing, and segment those by talking to them, by gathering information from Facebook, by doing little bounce back cards, little coupons, any little mechanism you use like that, and then expand on those, right? Another example, uh, they they had one wedding planner that was giving them thousands of dollars of business every month, right? Now, somewhat seasonal, but I said, well, how many other wedding planners are you targeting? Well, we really haven't. Why not? Well, we used to sell to two or three, but well, how many are out there? Well, I don't know, right? So in other words, he was already had a segment that had potential to expand, but he hadn't stepped back and looked at it as a segment. It was just part of the business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because he was segmenting everything using the old food, beverage, right, labor. And if you do it that way, you won't break out these differences.
Right. So this is kind of a chicken or the egg question here, especially I guess it kind of pertains to a startup. Um, and I know you have experience in this. So when you are, I guess, just thinking about going into business, or you have an idea for a product, I mean, do you start with a product or a service and look for an audience, or would it, for a startup especially, would it be good to look at your audience or the market and find uh, find a need to fill there? What would, I know you kind of done this before. What's your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, look, I mean, I'll use a phrase one of my professors used years ago. It all depends. You know, I mean, sometimes you can see where the market's going and then look and anticipate where consumers are going to go and what they're going to need, right? We'll give you an example. Like the pet industry has always been, a fairly stable growth, compound annual growth rate exceeding, the economy, right? The GNP. So, but with COVID, adoptions of dogs in particular skyrocketed, right? And then with you look at the demographics, you can start to go, well, if I look at who's adopted these dogs, I look at their lifestyle, there's going to be trends toward more expensive food items. There's going to actually life insurance for dogs is starting to skyrocket. Um, you know, Electronics because people want to because that becomes their family, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can do part of it by looking at where people are kind of heading, right? So that's one way, and you kind of get ahead of the curve. Then it becomes a timing issue, right? Because if you're too early with something, it'll fail, and if you're too late, well, you're too late, right? So it's kind of that dilemma, but you can get cues to where the market's going and develop products. Another is you can see what products people are doing, like the iPhone, right? The phone's been around forever, right? But what they did was they took known items. Most of the time in product development, it's taking a known item and another known item and bringing them together where it makes sense, right? Take a phone, bring it together where they can do other things with that phone they never were able to do before.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So a known to a known is another way to do things, right?
Yeah.
Um, that's another very common technique, and it works for services too. Um, and the other is, quite honestly, just going out and observing people, right? What do they do? How do they do things? Um, and adjust to what they're doing. Um, and looking at voids in the market, trying to identify voids or service voids. But again, if you look at the pandemic and how it's adjusted everybody, um, then just think through with some common sense, right? I mean, everybody's got that. To say, how would you adapt to that? What are people doing differently because of that? It's kind of like that bubble pressure theory. If you push
Mm-hmm.
on something like a balloon, that balloon morphs into a different shape, but that's all that's air still there. So if you push on that market and the people aren't doing, let's say, X like they used to do before, that energy is going somewhere. Where are they going, right? And talk to people. I mean, it's like talking to my friend who owns the restaurants, right? You talk to, and I can't overemphasize brainstorm with, if you have an existing business, brainstorm with the people you have. Because I'll tell you an example. We were in a strategic planning session. I won't name names or anything, but we were sitting there and they were about to get rid of a very expensive piece of equipment. And they said, well, nobody's used it in almost 10 years. And then somebody said, well, what does it do? And they said, well, it makes this kind of product. And they go, well, we never knew we had that. And now that I know we have it, I can put that in Home Depot and I can sell $10 million of that in the first year. So, if you in isolation, that vice president was about to get rid of a VP of manufacturing, a piece of equipment that was going to make him $10 million a year,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it was bringing people together to brainstorm that allowed that to happen.
Interesting. So Gina wants to know, where does someone find these market data facts? For example, how would you know who is buying more pet-related items or that they're buying them at all?
Well, first place to go is what they call secondary data, right? Secondary data being those information that's been compiled by somebody else that you can use for your benefit. So there's, back in the old days, you had to go to the library and, research. Today, you get on the computer and you just start Googling, right? And you look and you'll be surprised how much data you can find. It's phenomenal, and just keep digging. And so that's one. That's where you go first. You look for secondary data, and then you go to stores. You'll be surprised too if you go to a store and talk to people. I'll give you an example. I went into a PetSmart and was helping a company evaluate a pet product at the time, and he was using a scanner, and he was scanning products. And so I just walked up to him and said, "How many of those are you selling per store per week?" And he goes, "Oh, here, I'll tell you." And he scanned it, told me. I sell. Well, how about that one over there? So if you go talk to people, they'll tell you, right? Now you can always go in and buy. There's reports. Everybody's got reports they'll sell you. But I've found 90+% of the time, by going and gathering secondary data, Googling the heck out of something, and then just going into the field and talking to people, you'll gather more information you ever thought you would.
Mm-hmm.
And people will tell you. Store managers will talk to you. Consumers will talk to you. Talk to them. Why are you buying what you're buying? Now, the downside to that is people can't tell you about what they don't know, right? So if you're really pushing the envelope of development, you've got to go to them with something and show them, right? That's my dog. He's attesting to the same thing.
Yeah, that's
Does that answer your question?
yeah. That's interesting. And it's I've actually used that in the past. I mean, business owners and love to talk about their business. And one technique is to call competitors geographically far away from you. Like, so if we're in Louisville, we would call somebody in Kansas or something that has a similar business and see if they would talk to us. And
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so really, you can do all the research you need to do and not spend a dime on information or reports or things of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, look, for as you know, for 10 years, we did consulting. Steve and I did audits for businesses, products, and
Hmm.
never had to buy a report. Um, there's just so much information out there. Just spend the time, and Googling and digging. And there's associations out there, by the way. Tap into those. Oftentimes, they'll provide you information about their industry because they want you to get involved with their industry.
Yeah.
So tap into associations, um, and tap into as many groups as you can, like your group, for example,
Hmm.
right? Um, because you'll find most people are more open than you think.
Yeah.
It just takes some time.
That is true. I mean, we here at the Small Business Development Center, we subscribe to several databases that are fairly expensive. That we'll be happy to share that information. We'll pull a report for you. There's no charge for that. Yeah.
And you're on record, by the way, saying that. So
Yeah. Please reach out to me, Dave Etkin, and I'll be happy to do that for you. So on another note, sort of similar question. When you're doing like market sizing, same thing?
yeah, I mean, yes, and it depends. Again,
So
you
back to
have to.
you, just to clarify. So back to earlier, you want to make sure that there's a big enough opportunity for whatever you want to do. So how would you kind of vet that?
Well, for example, if it's an existing business, then you can start to get a feel for segments by querying the people you already have, right? 25% of the people, dine out, right? And then you can start to um, project that to other audiences, right? And you'll have to make some assumptions, but I mean, research is, you know, based on assumptions. There's no absolutes, right?
Mhm.
So there's always error involved, um, but it's really again kind of the same thing. Look at what you have today. Look at your market, and then gather information about trends. And look, um, 25% of my business is dining out. Well, I did some Googling, I did some talking with other people, and you know what? That's half of what most other companies similar to mine are doing, right? So I potentially am only reaching half of my audience, right? What else can I be doing? Conversely, you may find, hey, 25% of my business is dining, outside dining, um, and if I talk to other businesses in my area, it's only 10%. So I'm doing very well. I'm over-indexing in that area. I
Mhm.
don't want to spend a lot more time because I'm already doing really well, right? So I want to look at areas where I can grow my business. I want to maintain that one, but I want to grow with others. There's no definitive. Well, you can go to this particular source or do this particular thing. A lot of it's going to be um, just trial and error, gathering information in the marketplace you can, talking with people like yourself, tapping into those databases, um, and you know, if if somebody has a question and I'm not through, by the way, I'm not thoroughly answering it, you know, my phone number's here. Call. I'll talk to you. I mean, I'm not going to charge you for that. I want to help you. I mean, we're placed on this earth to help each other. So,
Mhm.
um, if I'm not capturing your question succinctly, feel free to call me, and I'll be happy to talk through it in more detail, and you know that's complimentary, by the way.
Yeah. I will say the one thing I've learned from you in the past, Lyle, is that I personally have a tendency to fall in love with my ideas, and a conversation with you really kind of helps kind of vet that you kind of see various sides of the solution, and you really know how to drill down and figure out where the opportunities are, and if there are opportunities. That's the other side. You're really good about vetting those kind of things.
It's called scars, brother. I got a lot of scars. Um, you know, I mean, I wish I could tell you I've always been right about new products and stuff. Some things where I thought they were spot on, and then I go to the consumer and get feedback, and they're like looking at me like, "What are you thinking?" You know. And then other times it's been, "Wow, you know what? This I think is going to be a hit." You know, the feedback we're getting, is been very positive. And then when I found that's been the case, I go ask more people to make sure, that it's
Hmm.
not an anomaly.
Right.
And I can't overemphasize, like when we helped a company with a pet product, literally going to different stores and interacting and talking with people. Um, you'll get some great information.
Yeah.
So,
And actually, that is you really can realize a lot of savings. Because if you make the wrong bet, I mean, it can be costly and risky. So, doing this kind of research on the front end before you make some sort of sea change is really important.
yeah, oh, absolutely. And one of the things, by the way, I've seen over the years is, particularly if you're an inventor, or it even applies to a new service, you're so enamored with what you've come up with that you kind of put blinders on. So just be very careful, right? I mean, you may be spot on and it's a great idea, but be open to, you know what, it's not a very good idea.
Yeah.
Right? So take the blinders off, and make sure when you ask questions, they're very open-ended. They're not biased questions like, right, well, you like this, don't you? You hear that all the time, and that puts people in a defensive mode, and they have to almost say, yeah, I do like it, right? So there's ways to ask questions. Just be careful when you do, interact with consumers in the marketplace, that you ask them in a very open, positive way, so that you get honest answers back, right?
Yeah. Great. Looks like that's all the questions we have, Lyle. And so I want to really thank you for joining us today. This is great. This is such a great subject for January, when you really want to start to look forward to your year, getting things ready and putting some things in place. So might have you back to talk about brainstorming if everybody's interested in that in the future. I am.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
Be happy to do it.
good.
I appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully this has been helpful for someone.
Yeah. So thanks everybody for joining us today. Please feel free to reach out to Lyle. There's his contact info. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. It's been another great Wednesday, and we'll be looking forward to seeing you next week. We'll be learning a little bit about LinkedIn marketing with some folks that are experts in the field. So we'll see you next week, and have a good Wednesday.